So what we're looking at is after the French Revolution gets started, I told you that Britain and France are kind of going to be looking to the United States to pick a side. And Washington believed very firmly that neutrality was the best option. Now, a lot of Jeffersonian Democrat Republicans, they thought we needed to honor our alliance with France and that we needed to help them against the British. Then the Federalists on the other side, of course, were thinking, no, we need to either avoid war or we need to support Britain in this case. And so Washington, what he's going to do is basically he understands that our military is not prepared for any sort of major conflict at the time. And pretty much him and Hamilton are saying, let's avoid war, wait this thing out for as long as we possibly can. And basically this will save our military from, being destroyed because we barely have one. It'll also hopefully help our economy because right now we're not super stable in terms of our economy. And politically speaking, we're obviously very fractured here with the Democratic Republicans and the Federalists. So once again, let's go ahead and kind of look at this and say we need to kind of back off here. And what will happen is, Jefferson, though his group supported the French here, I think he also understands, especially as Secretary of State, that the U.S. was just not in a position to pick a side and have to incur the wrath of one nation or the other. So Washington issues the Proclamation of Neutrality in 1793. And basically what Washington is saying here is that our government, the American government, will be officially neutral in all of the conflicts, but also said that American citizens themselves need to avoid picking sides and should not support one side or the other. And so what we're looking at here is an attempt to try and keep us from being embroiled in this. But remember, you still have a whole lot of Americans who, some of them are pro-French, some are pro-British. And usually the Federalists sided with the British, and the Jeffersonians or those Democrat Republicans sided with the French. The debate is going to get even worse when you have a guy named Edmond Genet, who was representative of France, of the revolutionary France, and he is in Charleston, South Carolina. And basically what's going to happen here is he is going to be kind of supporting and trying to drum up support for Americans to support the French in this conflict. He's going to go out and he's going to, I'll talk to a lot of people, especially who are trading with shipping, and he's going to convince us or try to convince Americans to join into an alliance. Washington will actually demand that he is essentially removed from the country, that he's not doing his job, and eventually he will be removed. So what we see is that, for the most part, we were interested at the moment in just us, America. That was number one priority. And by picking no sides, we hoped that that would kind of help us focus on us, ourselves. The other thing is that the French, they never actually ask us to come and honor the alliance and fight for them and help them with this revolution. But for the most part, the French just really needed our raw materials. And so, by us trying to remain neutral, we're just going to continue to try to trade and benefit and profit from both sides here. The British, on the other hand, this is frustrating for them. They'll still have their northern outposts that are on the western part of the frontier. And what they'll do is, of course, they'll say that, because we didn't honor the peace treaty and give back the loyalists their land, and it was split up, that they'll maintain those forts there. So they're going to continue to trade with natives, mainly in the fur trade. The other thing, too, is that London, or England, is hoping that Canada can have a buffer, an Indian buffer between it and America. They're worried that eventually the Americans are going to eye Canada, and so having this kind of Indian buffer state in between was seen as kind of one of the grand schemes or grand plans of the British Empire. But in the meantime, the British just continue to sell firearms and alcohol to the natives, try to get them to attack Americans on the frontiers, which they will do. You'll also have several armies, American armies, that are going to come out and try to fight these natives, and will actually suffer a bunch of really, really humiliating defeats. The American army does very poorly, led by Josiah Harmar and Arthur St. Clair. A ton of American soldiers will be killed fighting on the frontier. But then the Battle of Fallen Timbers, which was named because of the area they were fighting, was all these fallen trees kind of had cleared out like a space here. A new general named Anthony Wayne will actually prove to be a little more capable, and he defeats these Miami Indians who were attacking the frontier. And basically what's going to happen is the Miamis decide they have to make peace, and what you get is called the Treaty of Greenville. And what this says is that the Miami Indians are going to have to surrender these huge plots of land that are in the Pacific Northwest. In exchange, you receive $20,000 and an annual annuity of $9,000. They have the right to hunt on lands that they ceded. And they are hoping that the Miami Indians are hoping that they will have some sort of sovereign status, like be recognized almost as a state. It's not really going to be honored. But what this does is it also frees up a whole lot of territory for Americans to now start moving further west. And of course, as we're going to see, that some of these treaties are not really going to be honored that well. The other thing that we have is when the British, who are kind of frustrated with America for continuing to trade with other countries, they begin seizing American merchant ships. And they begin a policy what's known as impressment. And basically impressment, we talked about it, is taking these American sailors and forcing them into British naval service. A lot of these people will be thrown into dungeons. And of course, this will frustrate the Americans because they feel like they're not being respected, that Britain is doing this because they really don't respect Americans and sovereignty as a nation. Well, this is really going to hurt our trade. And so Washington is going to send his Chief Justice, John Jay, to London to try to negotiate some sort of treaty. Now, John Jay is an ardent Federalist, and so a lot of Jeffersonians will be kind of frustrated because they see that, okay, he's sending a Federalist, he's also sending what's called an Anglophile, a supporter of Britain here. And Jay's negotiations, when he goes over are somewhat sabotaged by Alexander Hamilton. Basically what you're going to see here is that the treaty itself, trying to think of the best way to word it. They're going to do some kind of secret deals here, like supplying the British about like American strategy, and Jay therefore isn't going to have a whole lot that he can bargain with. Hamilton does not want war with Britain, and so he wants the British to kind of almost have like a leg up on John Jay. And what you end up with is called Jay's Treaty. And basically the British say, okay, we're going to evacuate our forts on U.S. soil. We'll pay for all of those American ships that we seized. And at the same time, they don't ever mention anything about we're not going to, we'll stop impressing and seizing ships. In fact, the British continue to do it. And they also say, okay, well, we'll pull out of the forts, but then they start once again sending supplies of arms and equipment to natives. And so really the Jay Treaty here that we're seeing, it really doesn't help us out a whole lot. And of course what we see is the Democratic Republicans, they say, look at this. Like, basically they've given in to the British. The Federalists have given in to the British. And the other thing too is that this will hurt Washington's popularity as president. And this is a pretty big deal because we're seeing that the Federalists kind of for the first time are taking like a publicity hit here. The other thing, too, that kind of comes out of this is Pinckney's Treaty. Spain pretty much gives the Americans everything that we had wanted, which was navigation of the Mississippi, the right to have warehouses in New Orleans, and the territory of Florida. And this is because Spain is kind of scared that we're going to cozy up to Britain and that's going to hurt them. But remember, at this point, Spain is really kind of out of the game. When Washington leaves, and he gives his farewell address, what you'll see here is he writes down pretty much, stay out of permanent alliances. Don't get too entangled with foreign countries. If you have to, make a temporary alliance, go for it. Otherwise, stay out. The other thing, too, is, of course, he tells the country, be careful of kind of partisan politics. Don't split apart into parties. But by the time he leaves office, we now have a solid federal government. He's kept the nation out of wars that were happening overseas. And so we see our government kind of standing strong. The Constitution seems to be working for the most part. But once again, the country is still fairly divided. I mean, we are going to see here that the Federalists and the Democrat Republicans, come out of this thing still very much divided. Okay, next is John Adams, and only going to look at a little part of John Adams here, just kind of the beginning of his presidency. Adams barely wins here as President of the United States. Jefferson, who was his runner-up, becomes vice president. So you have a Federalist president and a Democratic Republican vice president. And Adams was just not a particularly good politician. He was very stubborn. He kind of stuck to his convictions, and he didn't like to compromise. Also, Adams, probably out of all of these guys that are going to be the first couple presidents here, he's probably the most like Hamilton in the sense that he felt himself more of an aristocrat than kind of a common person, and therefore he didn't really have a whole lot of appeal to the masses. People didn't generally like him. The other thing is he has to step directly into Washington's shoes, and following up on Washington's presidency was a pretty big game to follow. Hamilton also didn't like Adams, and Adams didn't like Hamilton, which is going to put them at odds, which of course is going to be a huge problem because Hamilton and his group of war hawks that kind of were going to favor war eventually, they were going to do everything they could to try to make Adams look bad, regardless of if they were the same party. So when Adams gets in, the French are responding to Jay's treaty. And they said, well, you're kind of breaking your alliance with us and you're moving closer to Britain. They say that it was a total violation of the French-American Treaty of 1778. And so the French, in retaliation, begin also seizing American merchant vessels. So you have the British who are seizing them and the French who are now seizing them. And when we send a envoy to Paris to kind of negotiate, the French pretty much say, no, we're not talking to him. We're not going to deal with him. And so Adams is going to try to figure out a way, how can we reach an agreement with France? And what you end up with is a pretty scandalous event, which becomes known as the XYZ affair. And basically the XYZ affair was these three French agents who kind of meet with these American diplomats are going to pretty much say that they need a loan, that France needs a loan, and that if we paid a bribe of $250,000, then they would kind of let us meet with the foreign minister. And this, of course, will get eventually printed, and you can see here's a political cartoon kind of making fun of it, will get printed in American papers. Word about this gets back, and Americans are angry because they say, this just shows that we are not respected overseas. They're trying to bribe American diplomats, and this is not how diplomacy works. And so what this will do is turn a lot of people against France, and you'll have this slogan, millions for defense, but not 1 cent for tribute, aka we are willing to go to war and not kind of give in to the French. And so Adams will basically begin pushing towards building up our military and creating a Navy, a Marine Corps, and then an army of 10,000 men that will kind of be preparing to go to war here. John Adams is considered generally the father of the American Navy.